Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and this morning I'm going to do another video based on a bit of a question that was asked by a viewer yesterday in terms, can you do a video on Priti Patel and the Tories trying to start a culture war? Certainly. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, culture, let's be clear about what we mean by a culture war at the moment in terms of changing politics. So, normally what politics should be about is policies. So you have maybe in a two-party system, which the UK largely is, there are other significant parties as well. But the ones who form a government will either largely be Conservative or largely be Labour. And in such a thing, you have your different policies and you're supposed to sell those policies to the country and see who gets voted in that time. Now, I've always thought it's always a little bit different in the UK compared to some countries, shall we say, some countries, because the Conservatives lie about their policies. It's never an honest debate because, for example, we know that the Conservatives stand for the privatisation of our healthcare system. They do not like a public healthcare system. We know that. But they always argue that they are going to protect the NHS and, what's more, protect the fact that it is a public service and publicly funded. Matt Hancock, the current Health Secretary, said there will be no privatisation of the NHS on his watch. But the NHS is already largely privatised. Before the general election, 26% of it was privatised already. In other words, 26% of the funding that comes from government to the NHS goes to private companies. That has increased. I don't know to what level, because until figures come out, which don't come out until next year at least, sometimes they're delayed by 2 years, we won't know. But we do know that more tenders have gone out for services that were previously not out for tender to private companies. So we know that the level has increased. And this is but it is still an argument about policies. Now, what a culture war is, it's where instead of trying to get people to back your position or vote for you based on policies, you do so based on how someone sees the country. You know, you try and bang the patriotism drum. What sort of country do you want to see? Which is brilliant for politicians because it means you don't even have to be clear about policies. You just have these vague notions. And this really began in earnest in 2016 with the Brexit Referendum, where, as we know about the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where data was stolen from Facebook and used to target people, to vote for Brexit. They were targeted with misleading ads, but that apparently came from lots of different sources. In fact, it was the same source. And people were getting the idea, oh, I'm seeing this from lots of different places, or the Institute of this, or this advisory committee and this, and it all sounds very good, and it was all done very well. And they're all saying the same thing. Well, if all these people all agree, and the nature with social media, of course, is you don't get a balanced view. Particularly Facebook, very echo chambery. So what they were doing was shifting the argument away from policies towards what sort of Britain do you want to see. And the Conservatives have been doing this again recently, and it works superbly for them because they're not interested in uniting the country. They always talk about uniting the country. They're never interested in that. That doesn't do them any favours at all. Because when the country does start to unite, what does it unite for? Against Conservative policies. The country was recently reuniting maybe, against Dominic Cummings' behaviour, for example, uniting against the piss-poor way NHS staff have been treated in terms of the equipment they'll be given, the NHS surcharge, uniting against the government stance on free school meals, all sorts of things like that. Where the Conservatives gain is where they use classic divide and rule tactics. And a culture war is a brilliant way to do it. For example, take the recent Black Lives Matter protests. Absolute classic case. So the Conservatives... Oh, I've just got to say this as well. I can't not mention this. Dominic Raab was on the... He was being interviewed yesterday, I think. Yes, well, I saw it yesterday anyway. And he was being asked about the taking the knee. Would you take the knee type of thing? And he says, I don't know. I'm going to put a link in the description below as well if you want to watch it yourself. It's actually quite painful. And he says he doesn't really know where this thing comes from. You think, hang on a minute, you're the Foreign Secretary, how can you not know this? But anyway, he says he doesn't really know where it comes from. He says, he says maybe there's some broader history to it. And then he said he thought it might come from Game of Thrones. I don't know. I don't understand what affinity would he really think there would be between the Black Lives Matter protest and the Game of Thrones. I mean, this is our Foreign Secretary. And bear in mind, and someone was asking me on Twitter, yes, was he genuine? Was he just doing this? Was he being a bit silly? I think it is genuine. You've got to remember, this is the person who didn't realise that, well, as someone else pointed out, that we were cut off by sea from France. But honestly, in all seriousness, as Brexit Secretary, he didn't understand how important Dover was as a port, our largest port. He didn't understand how important that was to trade. The point at which a lot of goods come into the country, he didn't understand the importance for trade. So I think it was absolutely genuine. But again, it shows their ignorance of these matters. But what the government are doing, of course, there's a number of reviews, really, commissions that have been made by the government to try and identify issues with racial inequality in this country and to come up with recommendations. They've got those recommendations, they haven't implemented them. To avoid implementing them, usually they just ignore them. But at the moment, the political heat's quite high on this issue. So what they've then done is, right, delaying tactics until the heat dies down, then we'll carry on doing nothing. So are they going to do something? No. What they're going to do is issue another commission. They want another report. But this is also where it's not just classic delaying tactics, this, because that'll take a year or so, or at least half a year. They're using it to stoke the culture war again, because what they're saying, we're going to look at, the issues around that, but we're going to particularly as well, it's not just a case of looking at, black populations and Asian populations. What we need to look at as well is, why is it that boys, particularly from white backgrounds, do so badly in school? Now, they know the issue around that. They know why that is, because as they know themselves, these white boys not doing very well in school are from disadvantaged backgrounds. It's a poverty issue. And of course, some of the issues in terms of, lack of scholastic achievement, shall we say, on the part of some ethnic minorities as well, I say some, not all, is also going to be related to that as well. But in terms of racial equality, we've got other issues. In other words, for example, why black Britons much more likely to be stopped by the police than white Britons? Why are black Britons going to find it much more difficult to get job interviews for certain jobs, with the same qualifications as a white fella? Those are the issues there. So why is Boris Johnson bringing disadvantaged white boys into a racial equality commission when he knows, well, that's a poverty issue, and he certainly doesn't want to do anything about that? He doesn't want to raise the aspirations of these poor white boys, because that would mean raising the standard of living for their families, not something he's terribly keen on. He knows that's a poverty issue. Why is he doing it? Because what he wants to say is, it's all very well the Black Lives Matter and people like this saying that they're being racially discriminated against. Do you know what? You white people are being discriminated against sometimes as well. I mean, you're being sidelined. That's what he wants to do. He's creating a them and us situation. The statues, absolutely classic case of a distraction. I've talked about it myself. It's not an issue that should be ignored. Ultimately, where did the statues thing come from? Black Lives Matter protests in Bristol, slaver, that the people of Bristol for decades have been appalled at the presence of. They wanted it gone. They demanded the council get rid of it. They weren't getting rid of it. So they used the protest, they just got rid of it. They chucked it in the sea. Then there was, was a racist, was written underneath Churchill in London as well. So, it spread a little bit. But no other statues were like ripped down or anything like that. But then what happened? You had a load of far-right thugs, white predominantly, going out saying they were defending war memorials and statues. No Black Lives Matters protesters had said anything or gone anywhere near a war memorial. No one's opposed to war memorials in this country, or no significant body of people is, at any rate. But they were shifting it. They were shifting it. And the Tories have jumped on this and talking about, pulling down statues is like trying to erase history, when of course it's not. But again, they're using it to stoke this culture war. Now, take the issue of statues, and it's where has Black Lives Matter gone in this country? It's now all about statues, but it's a huge distraction. If you think about it this way, so for white chaps like myself, who don't face daily discrimination, I very rarely faced racism. I occasionally face racism. Anyone can. Very, very rare. And, for me, I could look at the situation and really get into a philosophical debate about statues. Honestly, and I have done. But if you're a black person in this country, and let's say you are facing these sorts of discrimination, let's say you personally do get pulled over by the police on an alarming level of regularity, multiple times a year, maybe. I've once been pulled over by the police, and that was when they were just doing a Monday morning random breathalyzer thing. I was fine. Off I went. That was it, once in my entire life. Now let's say you get this multiple times a year, maybe even multiple times a month. Or let's say you're constantly failing to get job interviews, and your qualifications are really good for it, and your experience is superb, but you're failing to get them. And you think to yourself, do you know what? Do you think that might be because I've got a surname from my Nigerian heritage or something like that? And let's say you're facing verbal or physical abuse in the streets on a regular basis. Is your priority really statues? No, it's not. The Black Lives Matter protesters, the actual protesters in this country, are not really talking about statues. That's what the media have latched onto, because the Conservatives are highly, highly skilled at shifting the battle to where they can win. It's like a former Conservative Prime Minister by the name of Sir Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington. He was very adept at using terrain to his advantage and shifting the battle to it. And the Conservatives are also very, very good at that. They know they're on very dodgy ground if they actually look at the issues of racial inequality in this country. They know they're on very dodgy ground if they look at the issues of poverty and how that impacts people's lives. So they'll talk about statues, they'll talk about history, they'll talk about the flag, they'll talk about war memorials, which have got nothing to do with anything. War memorials. And that is what they're very adept at doing. And the benefit of a culture war as opposed to a policy war is it's about getting people to feel a particular way, and about getting the majority of people in a country to feel like they're being sidelined. It worked so well with Brexit, and it worked, as people point out, it worked particularly well in England and Wales, but particularly England, where, again, the fact that people in England don't have their own parliament, don't have their own assembly, so it's quite easy to tell people in England, you're sidelined, you're ignored. Even though they were being told it by the people ignoring them. And then what happens is when people say, oh yeah, you're right, I agree with that. And then when you agree with a person, a lot of people will then that other person then says, well, this is a solution. Even if it's not a solution, oh, well, I agree with your statement of the problem, therefore I support your solution. And that's how it works for them. And I think that is why they're doing it. And the question here had Priti Patel in there. Priti Patel is involved in it, but it's the Conservative Party in general that have seen the benefit in it. And when I say the Conservative Party in general, I mean the current leadership. There are, to be fair, Conservatives who are dismayed by this culture war just as much as anyone else would be. But there it is. Those are my thoughts on it. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.